The next item of business is consideration of business motion 5505 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a timetable for the Stage 3 consideration of the Scottish Civil Justice Council and Criminal Legal Assistance Bill. And I would ask any member who wishes to speak against the motion to please press the request to speak button now. And I call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 5505. Minister.
Formally moved.
Thank you. No member is asked to speak against the motion, therefore I will now put the question to the Chamber. The question is that motion number 5505 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to, and that then brings us to the next item of business, which is topical questions. Question number 1, Kenneth Gibson.
To ask the Scottish Government whether any economic benefits will accrue to Scotland from High Speed 2.
Minister Keith Brown.
Presiding Officer, the announcement by the Secretary of State for Transport yesterday on the proposed extension of high-speed rail to Manchester and Leeds is supported by analysis which suggests £3 billion of economic benefits to Scotland, which would be delivered after that line is completed in 2033. This is based on figures from the HS2 company. However, our ambition is for a full high-speed connection linking both Glasgow and Edinburgh with London and other cities across the UK, and our analysis is that a full network will deliver economic benefits worth £24 billion to Scotland. The HS2 analysis also shows that other areas of Britain will benefit more from HS2 and benefit sooner. The analysis shows that the West Midlands and North West will both see over twice the economic benefits delivered to Scotland. That's why we're pressing the UK Government for joint work towards Scotland's inclusion in a full UK high-speed rail network, and we'll work with the UK Government to achieve this.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the Minister for his reply. He clearly shares Scottish Chambers of Commerce view and that of our municipal leaders that Scotland cannot afford to be marginalised by its exclusion from this multi-billion-pound investment, which, if Scotland remains part of the UK, Scottish taxpayers will be expected to contribute a proportionate £3+ billion in construction costs. Does he agree that for Scotland to pay towards increasing the competitiveness of English cities at the expense of our own economy is the UK Government adding insult to injury? And what does he think of Tory MP Michael Fabricant's comments yesterday on Radio 4's World at One that this is a long-term project anyway, eventually HS2, and we do need a new line going from north to south, isn't going to be completed right up to Scotland until 2050-2060.
Keith Brown.
The last thing I want to do, Presiding Officer, is act as somebody who can interpret the comments of Michael Fabricant. I'll leave that to others better qualified than me. But Kenneth Gibson makes a very good point about the benefits to Scotland and also the costs. It will be interesting to see, for example, the treatment of consequentials money from the expenditure which the UK Government incurs on this project. But his other point about the benefits which will accrue is very relevant when you think of previous experience, say, for example, between Madrid and Seville, where everyone anticipated that the bulk of the benefits would accrue to Seville, and in fact the benefits accrued to an even greater extent to the larger, more populist capital of Madrid. London and England will benefit greatly as well from the high-speed link coming all the way to Scotland, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
Ken Gibson.
Minister, by 2033, Manchester to London journey times will be almost halved, where from Glasgow the improvement might be only 12%. So it's not really better together then, is it? If HS2 is not to be extended to Scotland in the foreseeable future, and like the Tories, the last UK Government had no such plans, will the Minister demand additional resources to upgrade and enhance the existing Scottish rail network to help end the growing economic imbalance between the northern half of the UK and the south east of England?
Minister.
I think I've made the comments that I have already in relation to consequentials, and that would be something which we'll bear in mind. But what we'd much rather see, of course, is a commitment from the UK Government to extending this to the high-speed rail link right the way through to Scotland. I don't believe the door is closed on that. We've had some very positive statements both from the Prime Minister and from the Secretary of State for Transport, which perhaps haven't been borne out yet by yesterday's or last week's announcement, rather. But it is the case that we will continue to push with the UK Government. We believe we can work with them to make sure that we have those benefits, and that would be the best way to spend the money. We've shown our bona fides by the statement by the Cabinet Secretary to say that we will push ahead with a high-speed rail link from Edinburgh to Glasgow. We want the UK Government to come with us so we can deliver a high-speed rail network that will deliver benefits to the whole of the UK.
Richard Baker.
Agree that construction of the high-speed rail line should start at the same time in the south and the north of England to speed up the network coming to Scotland. But can you explain how on earth making this case would be assisted by breaking up the United Kingdom?
Minister.
Well, I think, first of all, we've said to the UK Government we're happy to start at this end now, by the north. He mentions the north, Richard Baker mentions the north of England. We're happy to start now. If you look at the way that we're constructing the Borders Railway, we're not starting at one end and going to the other. We're starting at both ends and trying to make sure we push ahead as fast as possible. But we are trying to work constructively with the UK Government. Actually, although we are not happy and not content with their position so far, it certainly moves ahead of the position that the Labour Party had, where they had no commitment to bring the high-speed rail link to Scotland at all. So at least we're moved on from that position, and I'm confident we can make further progress.
Question number 2, Patricia Ferguson.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will accept in full the recommendations of the Electoral-Commission regarding the conduct of a referendum on Scotland separating from the rest of the United Kingdom.
Cabinet Secretary Nicola Sturgeon.
The Commission submitted extensive comments in response to our consultation on the conduct of the referendum last year. Government officials have been in regular contact with the Commission on the development of detailed arrangements since then. As with referendums held under UK legislation, it's for the Government to propose the referendum question, the Electoral-Commission to test the question and the Parliament to make a final decision. The Scottish Government will consider the wording of the question and indeed other matters relating to the conduct of the referendum in light of the Commission's advice, and of course the Scottish Parliament will have the final say during its scrutiny of the referendum legislation.
Patricia Ferguson.
I thank the Deputy First Minister for that answer, but I am disappointed to note that even now, with publication of the Electoral-Commission's advice imminent, and with a growing clamour of voices calling on the Scottish Government to commit to accepting the advice and recommendations which will be made, voices which include Blair Jenkins, the head of the Deputy First Minister's own campaign organisation. But the Deputy First Minister cannot now bring herself to reassure this chamber that her belief in independence extends to independent scrutiny too. So I ask again, in order to ensure that the referendum is carried out in a fair and proper manner, will the Deputy First Minister accept all the recommendations of the Electoral-Commission?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm not surprised to hear Patricia Ferguson express disappointment. It seems to be a bit of a permanent state. But let me try again to explain the process that we are engaged in. I have made very clear the considerable weight that will be attached to Electoral-Commission recommendations by the Scottish Government, not just on the referendum but on any relevant issue. I've also made very clear, and will do so again, that there would have to be a very good reason to depart from Electoral-Commission recommendations, and any government so doing would have to explain its position to this Parliament. But, given the respective roles of the Scottish Government, the Electoral-Commission and the Scottish Parliament, it would be an utter abdication of my responsibility as a minister to this Parliament to say what I thought of Electoral-Commission recommendations before I had even seen what those recommendations are. Now, as Patricia Ferguson says, we will hear the recommendations of the Electoral-Commission very soon, and because of that, we will, before too long, be in a position to have this discussion in a meaningful way, and I certainly look forward to that moment.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I thank the Deputy First Minister for that answer. And yes, she's right, I never failed to be disappointed in the SNP over this issue. But does she not understand that for this referendum to be carried out in a fair and proper manner, and as importantly, to be seen to be carried out in a fair and proper manner, the recommendations of the Electoral-Commission must be the guiding principles for the conduct of the referendum, both in terms of the question to be put and with regard to the spending limits to be applied?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think I've made crystal clear, not just in my previous answer, which I would hope Patricia Ferguson might have listened to a bit more closely, but previously how much importance we attach to the recommendations of the Electoral-Commission. And due process means that we wait to hear those recommendations. Having had the opportunity to see them, we then say what we think of them, what we will be saying in light of those recommendations, and asking Parliament to take the final decision on. Now, I don't know, well I do know actually, because I was on the opposition benches, how Labour used to run the government, but this government doesn't operate on the basis of commenting on recommendations of this nature before we see them. So I'll continue to operate according to good due process, and I look forward to having the debate meaningfully when we have the recommendations.
James Kelly.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. It's in the interests of all sides of this discussion that the referendum is seen to be conducted fairly. And I do believe that that fairness could be compromised by Scottish Government proposals on spending limits, which would see lead organisations with less than half to spend in real terms than in 1997, and political parties with less to spend than they would in council elections. Does the Cabinet Secretary not agree that the impartiality of the referendum process could be undermined if the Scottish Government proceed and impose such unrealistic spending limits?
Cabinet Secretary.
The referendum will be conducted completely impartially and to the highest, not just domestic standards, but international standards, and that is absolutely beyond doubt. So I've got a suggestion for the members on the Labour benches. Why don't we wait to see what the Electoral-Commission recommends? And then, by all means, they will have the right to ask me questions about my view on those recommendations. But I'm not sure if those on the Labour benches really appreciate how ridiculous it sounds to ask a minister to comment on recommendations that haven't actually been published yet. So let's have the debate when we have the Electoral Commission recommendations, and I look forward to having it at that time.